The battlefield was a wasteland of smoke and fire. The once thriving human colony now reduced to ruins under the relentless assault of the Yelvar Empire. The alien invaders had conquered dozens of worlds before this one, each falling quickly under the devastating power of their energy weapons. Their plasma rifles, capable of vaporizing most life forms in an instant, had never failed them until now. The first human soldier to be hit let out a scream of pain as the searing energy struck his chest. The Yelvar commander watched with satisfaction, expecting the body to disintegrate like every other species they had encountered. But then something unexpected happened. The human stumbled, clutching his chest, but he did not fall. His armor had melted away, his skin burned, but he was still standing. His breathing was ragged, his muscles trembling, yet his eyes burned with something the Yelvar had never seen before in their enemy's defiance. The Yelvar commander hesitated for a moment before ordering his troops to fire again. More plasma bolts slammed into the human, but instead of crumbling to the ground, he grit his teeth and took another step forward. The burns on his skin darkened, his body twitching, adapting. Within seconds, the pain on his face turned into something terrifying, a smirk. The Yelvar soldiers, trained to expect immediate victory, felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into their minds' fear. The human should have been dead, and yet he was moving. Then the impossible happened again. Another soldier was struck, and just like the first, he screamed but did not fall. His body convulsed, absorbing the energy, his skin growing tougher, the burns no longer spreading. More humans were hit, yet none of them died instantly. Some collapsed from the sheer agony of their injuries, but many others kept fighting. The Yelvar's greatest advantage, the weapon that had crushed entire civilizations, was failing them. The human soldiers who survived the first strike found that the second shot hurt less, and the third even less than that. Within minutes, the battlefield shifted. The Yelvar, once confident in their overwhelming firepower, were now the ones on the defensive. Their weapons were still deadly, but their enemies were no longer easy prey. Humans were learning, adapting, surviving. The Yelvar war machines unleashed concentrated plasma barrages, sending streaks of blue energy raining down upon the battlefield. Some humans fell, their bodies unable to adjust quickly enough to the sheer force of the attack, but many others did not. The ones who survived the first blast barely flinched at the second. One soldier, his armor completely burned away, charged forward, his body glowing faintly from the energy he had endured. He tackled a Yelvar trooper to the ground, his fists striking with unnatural force. Another human, his uniform in tatters, grabbed a fallen plasma rifle and fired it back at the invaders, his hands showing no sign of injury from the weapon's overheating barrel. The realization dawned on the Yelvar in horror. Humans weren't just resisting their energy weapons. They were becoming immune to them. The Yelvar commander, watching the battle unfold from the safety of his command post, felt a chill run down his spine. No species had ever survived direct hits from their weapons, let alone continued fighting after being struck multiple times. This was unnatural. It was impossible. And yet, it was happening. Reports were coming in from every front. Human soldiers were becoming harder to kill with each passing minute. Some of them were even faster, their movements sharper than before. He watched, horrified, as an entire squad of Yelvar warriors emptied their weapons into a single human. The soldier stumbled, blood dripping from his wounds, but instead of falling, he lifted his head and roared. The next instant, he charged forward, faster than before, as if the energy had fueled his rage rather than ended his life. His squad followed, their bodies hardened by the very weapons that were supposed to destroy them. The battlefield was no longer a place of conquest for the Yelvar, it was a nightmare. Their once feared plasma rifles, the tools of their dominance, had become useless against these creatures. The humans should have been outmatched, overwhelmed, eradicated within minutes. Instead, they were advancing, their bodies growing stronger, their resilience turning them into monsters of war. The Yelvar troops, their discipline shattered, began to retreat. Some turned and ran, throwing down their weapons in desperation. Others tried to fight, but their hands shook, their aim unsteady, as the humans kept coming. The Yelvar commander clenched his fists, his mind racing for a solution. If energy weapons no longer worked, they would have to rely on traditional ballistic weaponry, but they had abandoned such crude methods centuries ago. Humanity had forced them into an impossible situation: adapt or perish. As the first human soldiers reached the Yelver lines, the battle turned into a massacre. The once invincible invaders were now the hunted. The humans fought with a fury unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, their bodies no longer fearing the searing pain of plasma. The Yelvar commander knew that this was only the beginning. If humanity could survive their deadliest weapons, what else were they capable of? How far could they evolve? His species had always seen themselves as superior, as conquerors of the weak. But today, for the first time in history, they had encountered something far more terrifying. A species that didn't just endure war, a species that thrived in it. From the shadows of space, the Galactic Council watched the battle unfold. Every species that had once dismissed humanity as primitive now saw the truth. The Yelvar had unknowingly awakened something that could change the course of history. The Council had a difficult choice to make: should they interfere, or should they let this battle play out? One thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. And neither would humanity. The battlefield was no longer a place of conquest for the Yelvar; it had become a nightmare. What should have been an easy victory had turned into chaos as human soldiers, struck by energy weapons meant to vaporize them, refused to fall. The Yelvar war machine, armed with the most advanced plasma-based arsenal in the galaxy, found itself in an impossible situation. Every species they had encountered before had crumbled under the might of their weapons, their bodies unable to withstand the extreme heat and energy of plasma bolts. But humanity was different. Humans did not just resist the energy, they adapted. The first few shots had inflicted terrible burns, leaving soldiers writhing in pain, but as the battle dragged on, something terrifying happened. The same soldiers who should have died got back up. Their bodies hardened. Their skin, once vulnerable, now barely blistered from the heat. The next wave of plasma fire only slowed them down, not stopped them. Some even moved faster, their reactions sharpening. The Yelvar soldiers, once confident in their overwhelming technological superiority, felt fear creeping into their minds as their deadliest weapons became useless. The first sign of complete panic came when an entire squad of Yelvar fired at a human soldier charging toward them. Plasma bolts lit up the battlefield, striking him in the chest, shoulders, and legs. For a moment, he staggered, his body trembling from the sheer force of the attack. But instead of falling, he roared an earth-shaking sound of raw defiance and kept running. The squad barely had time to react before he reached them, his body now glowing faintly, his muscles coiled with energy. His fists struck with unnatural power, sending Yelvar soldiers flying backward. The ones who managed to raise their weapons fired again, but it was already too late. The more they shot him, the stronger he seemed to become. He tore through them like a force of nature, his rage fueled by the very weapons designed to kill him. And he was not the only one. More humans, their bodies adjusting to the once lethal plasma, stormed forward, their eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. The Yelvar commanders, watching from their fortified positions, couldn't believe what they were seeing. Their troops, trained for war, were in full retreat. It was an unheard-of sight: Yelvar warriors fleeing, their formations breaking apart, their discipline shattered. The humans weren't using advanced technology. They had no energy shields, no force fields, no genetic enhancements. They were simply evolving. Fast. The command center was filled with frantic voices, reports flooding in from across the battlefield. Every engagement told the same story. The longer humans fought, the more resistant they became. A soldier who had barely survived his first plasma wound would shrug off the next. Some even started showing signs of something far worse: they were absorbing energy and using it to fight back. The first confirmed case sent shockwaves through the command network. A human, hit repeatedly by plasma fire, had somehow redirected the built-up energy, releasing it in a sudden explosion that wiped out an entire Yelvar squad. At first, it was dismissed as battlefield confusion, but then it happened again. And again. More humans, exposed to concentrated plasma fire, began unleashing bursts of raw energy from their bodies. Some used their hands, sending shockwaves that knocked back enemy soldiers. Others channeled it into their weapons, their blades glowing with deadly power. The battlefield was no longer just a fight. It was a terrifying display of human evolution in real time. The Yelvar High Command knew they had to act fast. This battle had to end before the humans adapted even further. They authorized the use of heavy orbital bombardment, massive energy strikes meant to incinerate the entire war zone. If they couldn't kill humans one by one, they would burn the entire battlefield to ash. High above, Yelvar warships positioned themselves for the attack. But before they could fire, the impossible happened again. The humans, now fully aware of their own strange new abilities, focused. Those who had endured the heaviest fire began to absorb the ambient energy from the air itself. The moment the first orbital cannon discharged its deadly beam, a massive surge of light erupted from the ground. The beam never reached its target. Instead, it was intercepted by the humans. A shockwave rippled outward as the energy was absorbed, redirected, then fired back in an uncontrolled explosion that engulfed the sky. One of the Yelvar warships took a direct hit, its hull melting under the same plasma it had just unleashed. The Yelvar fleet, once the dominant force of the battlefield, now faced something they had never prepared for: an enemy that could turn their own weapons against them. The realization sent waves of fear through the Yelvar ranks. They had assumed humanity was just another primitive race, one that could be conquered like all the others. But now, they saw the truth: humanity was something new, something different. They did not just resist destruction, they turned destruction into power. The Yelvar commanders knew they were out of time. They gave the order to retreat. Their once mighty army, which had arrived with confidence, now fled in disarray, their warships scrambling to break orbit before they too fell victim to the impossible force growing below them. The Galactic Council, watching from the shadows, observed everything in silence. They had seen wars before, countless conflicts across thousands of worlds. But this was something they had never witnessed. A species that could not only survive war, but adapt to it. The implications were staggering. If a single battle had turned humanity into this, what would happen in a year? In a decade? Would there ever be a force strong enough to stop them? As the Yelvar fleet vanished into the void, Earth soldiers stood victorious, their bodies changed forever. What had begun as an invasion had ended as something far greater: a turning point in history. Humanity had discovered something inside them that no other species had. Something unstoppable. The war was far from over, but one thing was certain: this was no longer just a fight for survival. This was evolution, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Yelvar Empire had never known defeat until now. What was supposed to be an easy conquest had turned into a nightmare. Their energy weapons, the same technology that had crushed countless civilizations, had become useless against the humans. At first, the plasma burned them, seared their flesh, left them screaming in pain. But they didn't die like other species. They adapted. Their bodies changed, their resistance grew, and soon, the energy that was meant to kill them only made them stronger. The Yelvar had barely escaped with their lives in the last battle, retreating to. For the first time in galactic history, the Yelvar were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. Humanity had discovered its true power, and they were coming. The Yelvar homeworld, a fortress world surrounded by layers of defenses, prepared for the inevitable retaliation. Their fleet, once the pride of the Empire, floated in high orbit, weapons charged, waiting for the human counterattack. Every soldier, every officer, every citizen held their breath, dreading what was coming. And then, the void of space burned. Dozens of human warships emerged from hyperspace, their hulls glowing faintly with residual energy. They were nothing like the Yelvar expected: no sleek, elegant designs, no advanced shielding or cloaking technology, just raw power. Their ships, built for brute force, carried weapons that were once outdated: ballistic cannons, railguns, missile launchers. Primitive. Or so the Yelvar had believed. But they had forgotten one thing: humanity did not need energy weapons. They had learned to turn energy itself into a weapon. The first strike came without warning. The Yelvar fleet, expecting a slow approach, were caught off guard as human warships accelerated beyond all logic, their engines burning with power no one had ever seen before. They moved faster than physics should have allowed, their hulls glowing with absorbed energy, their weapons firing with terrifying precision. The Yelvar ships retaliated with their plasma cannons, but it was useless. The humans had adapted. Their hulls, once fragile, now resisted energy impacts, like they were nothing more than a breeze. Some ships absorbed the shots entirely, their surfaces shimmering before unleashing the stolen power back at the enemy. Humanity had become the ultimate weapon. Within minutes, the Yelvar defensive line collapsed. Their capital ships, once the rulers of the battlefield, were reduced to burning wreckage. The humans did not fight with strategy alone. They fought with something far worse, relentless, unstoppable fury. Every attack from the Yelvar was returned tenfold. Their warships, outnumbered but evolving with every second, carved a path through the enemy fleet. Yelvar officers screamed orders, their systems failing to keep up with the speed and adaptability of their foes. The battle should have lasted hours, but within half that time, the Yelvar fleet was in full retreat. And then, humanity struck the surface. Drop pods rained down like falling stars, crashing into the Yelvar cities with thunderous force. The ground forces of the Empire gathered, their plasma weapons at the ready, but it was a hopeless fight. The first wave of human soldiers emerged, their bodies glowing with absorbed energy, their wounds sealing almost instantly. The plasma fire that once melted through armor now barely left a scratch. The humans charged, no longer fearing the weapons of their enemies. Some wielded nothing but their fists, their blows shattering Yelvar defenses like paper. Others had turned their own bodies into conduits of energy, unleashing devastating blasts that tore through enemy lines. The Yelvar fell by the thousands, their warriors unable to keep up with creatures that refused to die. The capital of the Empire, once a shining beacon of power, was now a battlefield. The Yelvar High Council, the rulers of the Empire, watched in horror as their world burned. They believed themselves to be the strongest species in the galaxy, unchallenged and supreme. But they had made a fatal mistake. They had attacked humanity first. And now, humanity had come to end them. The last line of defense, the palace guard, stood in front of the council chamber, their weapons shaking in their hands as the doors were blasted open. A single human soldier stepped inside, his armor scorched, his face partially burned, but his body standing tall, unbroken. The energy from the last plasma barrage still crackled around him, his hands glowing with raw, unstable power. He took a single step forward, and the Yelvar Council cowered. "You should never have come to our world," the human said, his voice like thunder. "Now, your empire dies." With a single movement, he unleashed a surge of energy so powerful that the walls of the chamber disintegrated. The High Council was gone in an instant, wiped out by the very power they had tried to wield against humanity. Outside, the last remnants of the Yelvar resistance crumbled. Their soldiers surrendered, throwing down their weapons in despair. Their people, once arrogant and proud, fell to their knees, realizing that they had brought this upon themselves. Humanity had done what no other species had dared to do. They had struck back, and they had won. As the last flames of war died down, the remaining Yelvar looked up at the human flag now flying above their ruined capital. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. They had faced extinction, adapted to it, and become something greater. The galaxy would never forget what had happened here. The name of humanity would be whispered in fear and respect across the stars. And to those who still thought they could challenge them, one simple truth remained: humanity does not fall. Humanity rises. The war had reached its final moments. The Yelvar Empire, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, was now nothing more than a broken remnant of its former self. Their fleets had been destroyed, their armies shattered, and their homeworld reduced to burning ruins. But despite everything, they still had one last hope, a secret fortress hidden deep within the dying embers of their empire. It was their last refuge, their last chance to survive. Here, Their remaining warlords and scientists worked desperately to create a final weapon, something that could turn the tide against humanity before they were completely wiped from existence. They believed that if they could unleash this last attack, they could force humanity into retreat. They believed they still had a chance. They were wrong. Humanity was already coming. Across the dark void of space, the last human fleet approached the Yelvar stronghold. They had tracked the fleeing warlords, studied their every movement, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. There would be no more mercy, no more negotiations. The Yelvar had started this war, and now humanity would finish it. The fleet, once a collection of simple warships, had evolved into something terrifying. Their technology had advanced at a speed no one had thought possible. Their ships now thrived on the very energy that had once been used against them. Plasma weapons, once useless, were now fully integrated into their systems. The humans no longer just resisted energy, they controlled it.ase. The fleet emerged from hyperspace. The Yelvar defenses activated. Thousands of automated cannons turned toward the approaching human warships, unleashing a storm of plasma fire. The sky burned with deadly light, but the human ships did not stop. Instead of avoiding the attack, they absorbed it. The energy crackled along their hulls, feeding into their systems, making them faster, deadlier. And then they struck back. The first wave of human firepower tore through the Yelvar defenses like they were nothing. Railguns, kinetic cannons, and energy lances turned the fortress's outer perimeter into dust. The once impenetrable stronghold now had gaping holes in its walls. But the Yelvar had prepared for this moment. Their warlords had gathered their best warriors, their last remaining elite soldiers, and stood waiting for the ground assault. If they were going to die, they would make sure humanity paid a heavy price. Drop pods crashed into the surface, each one carrying a force of human soldiers, more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They no longer feared energy weapons. They no longer fought with just brute strength. They had become the storm. The moment the pods opened, chaos erupted. The Yelvar fired desperately, but their plasma bolts barely slowed the human warriors. The first wave of defenders were obliterated in seconds, their bodies sent flying as human soldiers charged forward. Some wielded weapons that burned with absorbed plasma energy, their blades cutting through armor as if it were paper. Others moved so fast that the Yelvar could barely track them. The battlefield, once their last hope, became their final graveyard. Inside the fortress, the warlords watched in horror as their defenses fell. Their last weapon, a massive energy cannon designed to release enough power to incinerate an entire fleet, was still charging. They needed more time. But humanity was unstoppable. The main doors of the stronghold exploded inward, sending shockwaves through the entire structure. A squad of human soldiers stormed in, their eyes glowing with energy, their very presence radiating power. The last of the Yelvar guards tried to fight, but it was hopeless. Humanity had evolved beyond them. The leading warlord, a creature once feared across the stars, now stood trembling as the humans approached. He reached for his weapon, but before he could fire, the closest human raised a single hand. Energy crackled around him, and in an instant, the warlord's weapon melted in his grasp. The human warrior stepped forward, his voice calm, yet filled with a power that made the Yelvar shake. "This is over," he said. "You lost the moment you chose war." The warlord, refusing to surrender, lunged forward in a last, desperate attack. But he never reached his target. The human's fist struck him with the force of a dying star, and the last hope of the Yelvar Empire was silenced forever. Outside, the battle had ended. The fortress, the final stronghold of the once great empire, now stood in ruins. The last surviving Yelvar warriors dropped their weapons, surrendering to the inevitable. Humanity had won. As the dust settled, the human leader stood at the edge of the battlefield, looking down at the broken remains of the Yelvar. He knew this was not just a victory. This was a warning to the entire galaxy. Humanity had faced extinction, had been pushed to its limits, and had emerged as something more. Something no one could ever defeat again. And as their warships prepared to leave, one message was sent across the stars, a final declaration that would echo across the galaxy for for generations to come. Humanity does not kneel. Humanity does not fall. Humanity rises, and we will never be stopped. The war was over. The Yelvar Empire, once the most feared force in the galaxy, was gone. Their homeworld lay in ruins, their fleets had been reduced to wreckage, and their leaders had perished in humanity's final assault. The galaxy, which had watched humanity's rise with cautious curiosity, now trembled at the reality before them. The species they had once dismissed as primitive, weak, and unworthy of attention had not only survived an attack from the greatest empire in existence they had won, and now the balance of power had shifted forever. In the silent void of space, above the shattered remains of the Yelvar homeworld, the human coalition fleet stood victorious. Massive warships, once built in desperation, now hovered as symbols of dominance. Their designs were no longer crude imitations of alien technology, but something entirely new: sleek, reinforced hulls pulsing with stored energy, weapons that absorbed and redirected enemy fire, and engines that pushed the boundaries of physics. Humanity had not just adapted to energy warfare, they had mastered it. The last battle had proven beyond doubt that no species in the galaxy could stand against them. But now, with victory in their hands, a new question arose: what came next? The Galactic Council, an ancient alliance of powerful species, had called for an emergency meeting. The destruction of the Yelvar had changed everything. The Council had never interfered in the war, assuming the Yelvar would crush humanity before they could become a threat. But now, they had no choice. The humans were the dominant force, and no one knew their intentions. In the Great Hall of the Council, representatives from dozens of species gathered, their expressions tense, their voices filled with uncertainty. The towering Exelnari, whose crystalline bodies shimmered under the chamber's lights, whispered amongst themselves. The reptilian Drakvar, known for their warlike nature, remained silent, their sharp eyes scanning the room. Even the Votharii, a race of artificial intelligences, seemed hesitant. For the first time in millennia, the Council faced an unknown threat, a power they could not control. And then the doors opened. A single human stepped forward. Unlike the heavily armored soldiers that had torn through the Yelvar ranks, he wore no weapons, no symbols of war. His presence alone was enough. The room fell silent as he walked to the center of the chamber, his gaze steady, unshaken by the weight of 1,000 alien eyes upon him. When he spoke, his voice carried the same strength that had shattered an empire. "Humanity has changed," he said. "We were once explorers, traders, scientists. But when the Yelvar came to destroy us, we became something else. We fought, we adapted, and we survived. And now, we stand here, not as conquerors, but as equals." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Equals? Some of the council members had expected a declaration of war, a demand for submission. But humanity was not here to rule through fear. They did not need to. Their power was already undeniable. The Yelvar believed strength gave them the right to dominate, the human continued. They were wrong. Strength is not about destruction. It is about responsibility. And so, we offer the galaxy a choice. We do not seek to rule, but we will not be ignored. The room remained still, the weight of his words sinking in. The message was clear: humanity would not impose its will on others, but neither would they bow to anyone. They had earned their place among the stars, and no one could deny it. The council debated for hours, but the outcome was inevitable. By the end of the meeting, a decision had been made: humanity was to be recognized as a major power. They would take their place on the council, not as a species to be tolerated, but as one to be respected. The human representative left the chamber. A message was sent across the galaxy. Worlds that had once feared the Yelvar's wrath now looked to Earth as a beacon of strength. Civilizations that had doubted humanity's survival now sought alliances. And those who still saw them as a threat? They remained silent, knowing that any challenge would end the same way the Yelvar had. The stars had a new ruler, not through conquest, not through tyranny, but through sheer, undeniable power. And the galaxy would never be the same again.